of this program. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We're so excited to be able to come together today, even virtually, for this swearing in of Virginia's next Poet Laureate. Over my last 6 years in the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office, this has become one of my favorite events. I administer the oath of office on a regular basis. I've done it 6 times already this week, but this one's always very special. When we decided to make this an event a few years ago, it may have been selfishly motivated. We had the opportunity to meet the poet and hear the work that we had all become so familiar with. But it wasn't all selfish, of course, and the Poetry Society does amazing work putting forth nominations for the Poet Laureate. I wanted to share this occasion with everyone who's made this possible. I'm going to turn it over to the First Lady in a minute, but before that, I wanted to thank the Poetry Society of Virginia and all of the talented poets who share their love and work with Virginia. We had stellar nominees this year, and I want to acknowledge David Wofon and Bill Glose, who submitted works as well. It's been such an honor and a privilege and a joy to be able to read your work and share it with others. It's now my pleasure to introduce our First Lady of Virginia, Pam Northam. Pam is an educator in practice and in heart. As First Lady, she's devoted her time to make sure our youngest Virginians have access to quality early childhood education, and hopefully developing a love of learning and reading at a young age. It's no doubt her work will give the building blocks to our young Virginians to one day become the next Poet Laureate of Virginia. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful First Lady, Pam Northam.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you, Kelly, even though you're just technically down the hall. It's nice to see you once in a while. We're not all together like we used to be. And congratulations to you and your team. What a wonderful choice that you all have made, and what a difficult decision to make. But we're all so glad to be here today. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this special day. What an honor it is to be in this virtual liminal space with so many incredibly talented poets and artists from all across the Commonwealth. The governor and I are so pleased to be able to continue this great tradition of appointing a new Poet Laureate of Virginia this year, who will serve as our next Chief Ambassador of Poetry. I mean, wasn't it just yesterday that we were all gathered together in Richmond to witness and celebrate the oath of Henry Hart, our wonderful outgoing Poet Laureate? It's so hard to believe that just 2 years ago, and a world of change has taken place since that happy day. And I don't think any one of us could have imagined where we would be now. Do you know, in these especially difficult times, the arts are so important to helping us to find our way, as always, to help build bridges across Virginia, the nation, and the world. As Rami Nashashibi says, the arts have become the real factor for us in both humanizing each other's stories, connecting our stories, and revealing to one another the possibilities of what a better world can look like. I think of art as the universal language, often communicating in ways that transcend words. Art tells us a story we can hear with our hearts, sometimes provocative and challenging, and often helping us to see the world through another's eyes. It can be sublimely beautiful, expressing our greatest joys and our deepest sorrows. However, as much solace as it can bring, creating art is not so easy. And I'm reminded of the poet Mary Oliver, who wrote, "It's 6 a.m. and I am working. I'm absent-minded, reckless, heedless of social obligations. The tire goes flat, the tooth falls out, but the poem gets written. I have wrestled with the angel and I'm stained with light and I have no shame. My loyalty is to the inner vision whenever and howsoever it may arrive." That's a familiar struggle for many, although our extraordinary poets who are honored today make it look so easy. With Dr. Louisa A. Gloria's commitment to one glorious poem a day, which I find incredible, and the great volume of work by the talented Mr. Hart. Many of you may know that Henry Hart grew up in a small farming town in western Connecticut. We'll allow him that. If it wasn't Virginia, he came to us, and that's okay. He attended Dartmouth College and a small, relatively unknown school, Oxford University, receiving his doctorate in English literature. He's published 4 books of poetry, as well as scholarly studies of Seamus Heaney, which we were just speaking about, Robert Lowell, and Geoffrey Hill. He has also published biographies of Robert Frost and James Dickey. His poems and essays have appeared in the New Yorker, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Kenyon Review, New England Journal, and many, many others. His first teaching job was at the Citadel. I won't tell the governor who went to VMI about that. That's okay. And in Charleston, South Carolina. And since 1986, he has been at the College of William and Mary, where he is now the Mildred and J.B. Hickman Professor of Humanities. He served as Virginia's Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020. Mr. Hart, we thank you for your outstanding devotion and service to the Commonwealth and for all you do to fan the winds of change in the whole Commonwealth and for all citizens. Will you please share with us, in your own much more eloquent words, what this experience as Poet Laureate has been like for you? And I hope you'll share with us the gift of some of your beautiful poetry.
I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And I'd like to thank everyone in the governor's office and everyone in the Poetry Society of Virginia for making my term as Poet Laureate possible. I had a great time and I greatly appreciated the honor. When I was sworn in 2 years ago, it was quite different. I said one of the things that I wanted to do was to be a good ambassador for poetry in Virginia. And indeed, I traveled far and wide, and I gave lectures on poetry. I read my own poetry, and I read some poems by other poets. I also said in the swearing-in ceremony that I wanted to try to improve the finances of the Poetry Society. We had some financial difficulties. I also wanted to try to reconnect the Poetry Society, especially the annual festival with the College of William and Mary, although I think I'm supposed to just call it William and Mary now. The Poetry Society of Virginia was founded at William and Mary back in 1923. And in the past, sometimes we've had a hard time finding a place for the festival. I had some good luck. A former president of William and Mary, who had been an English major and who liked poetry, donated a substantial sum to fund the Poetry Festival. And then the widow of an English professor also agreed to donate. So we're in better financial shape now. As far as my role as poetry ambassador, I was often asked to write poems, sometimes read poems at special occasions, like the inauguration of our first woman president at William and Mary. Now, William and Mary began in 1693, and up until a few years ago, all the presidents had been men. So I wrote a poem for President Catherine Rowe, basically arguing that it was a time for a woman to move beyond his story and create her story. That was the wordplay in the poem. I was also asked to write a poem for a big July 4th ceremony in colonial Williamsburg. I wrote a poem about the history of Williamsburg. The actress Anika Noni Rose was just about to read the poem from the balcony of the old governor's palace in colonial Williamsburg, 9 o'clock, July 4th, about 2 years ago. And then the thunder and lightning began, the rain began, and I and thousands of others had to make a run for it. We all got drenched, and the July 4th event was canceled. So the idea was to have someone, perhaps Anika Noni Rose, read the poem this past July 4th. Well, because of the virus, once again, the poem was not read. So I'm hoping maybe next year we'll be in a better place and the poem will be read. I wanted to read one poem that was also written for a special occasion, and that was a celebration of what in Williamsburg we call the Freedom Bell. at the First Baptist Church. The Freedom Bell was in the news a while ago because it was transported up to Washington, D.C. for the opening of the new African American Museum, Culture and History on the Mall. President Obama and others rang the Freedom Bell, and then it was brought back to the church. So I wrote a short poem, A Villanelle, that honors the enslaved people who back at the end of the 18th century met in a rough shelter in the woods on a plantation near Williamsburg, Green Spring Plantation. Of course, it was illegal to meet. That's where they met to worship. And that was the origin of the First Baptist Church. For a long time, they didn't have a church. And then in the middle of the 20th century, when they had a church, the bell fell into disrepair. And only recently, it was renovated, and a lot of people from actually all over the world have come to ring the Freedom Bell. So this poem is simply called The Freedom Bell. I begin with an epigraph from the 19th century African-American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. You might recognize one of the phrases in the epigraph. I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free. The poem is dedicated to the founders of the First Baptist Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I read this in the church right before the virus struck. So it was really my last public appearance as poet laureate. But it's about the founders of the church. Even without a church, they heard bells ring in the forest clearing where they had to hide and free their caged hearts so they could sing. On the plantation named for a green spring, grass buried the names of slaves who died, hoping to build a church with a bell to ring. Like the cold, clear water they longed to drink while toiling in the fields, faith inspired their caged hearts beating for the right to sing. A man from town who heard them chanting prayers from a hut of poles and brush provided his carriage house, but still no bell to ring. Many fought for freedom from the English king and won, yet our new government denied a place where all caged hearts were free to sing. The bell was silent when Dr. King came to the Baptist church and prophesied that one day a new bell would let freedom ring. Now ring that bell and let each caged heart sing. So now I'd like to introduce the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and I have some prepared remarks. And yes, I'd like to especially thank Kelly Thomason for being the organizer of these ceremonies inaugurating poet laureates. As Secretary of the Commonwealth, Kelly is passionate about creating a state government that is open and welcome to everyone. Kelly assists the governor in recruiting and appointing over 3,000 qualified, service-minded individuals to serve on Virginia's boards, commissions, and councils. In addition, the office serves the Commonwealth through managing clemency petitions, restoration of civil rights, extraditions, service of process, authenticating documents, and commissioning notaries public. The Secretary of the Commonwealth acts as the governor's liaison to Virginia's Indian tribes, as well as the Council on Women. Kelly Thomason was reappointed as Secretary of the Commonwealth by Governor Northam after serving in that role since 2016. So I'll turn everything over to Kelly now, who I think is going to introduce our next Poet Laureate. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was wonderful. Your works was really touching, and we enjoyed that a lot. I'm glad that we could come together virtually since we couldn't come together in person, but it's definitely not the same to be in the room and to hear it, and I think also for you to be able to capture sort of the emotions that you invoked from the crowd, and I know we all enjoyed that a lot. So thank you a lot. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our new Poet Laureate, Louisa A. Gloria. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Louisa, and then we'll conduct her oath of office, and then we'll hear from her. So Louisa A. Gloria is one of two co-winners of the 2019 Crab Orchard Poetry Prize for Match for Migrants and Ghosts. In 2015, she was the inaugural winner of the Resurgence Prize, the world's first major award for eco-poetry, selected by former UK Poet Laureate Sir Andrew Motion, Alice Oswald, and Joe Shapcott. Former US Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey selected her chapbook, What Is Left of Wings, I Asked, as the 2018 recipient of the Center for the Book Arts Letterpress Poetry Chapbook Prize. Other works include The Buddha Wonders If She Is Having a Midlife Crisis, Ode to the Heart Smaller Than a Pencil Eraser, and 12 other books. Her poems are widely published or appearing in national and international anthologies and print and online literary journals, including Orion, Shenandoah, Indiana Review, Crab Orchard Review, Diode, Missouri Review, Rattle, Poetry East, Your Impossible Voice, Poetry, Shanghai Literary Review, Cha, Hotel America, Spoon River Poetry Review, and others. With over 30 years of experience teaching literature and creative writing, Louisa also leads workshops at the Muse Writers Center in Norfolk and serves on the Muse board. She is the Louise I. Jaffe Professor and University Professor of English and Creative Writing, teaching in the MFA Creative Writing program at Old Dominion University, which she directed from 2009 to 2015. And as the First Lady mentioned earlier, for over 9 years to date, she has been writing at least a poem a day. It is wonderful to introduce to you all our newest Poet Laureate of Virginia, Louisa A. Gloria. Thank you so much, Louisa. We can't wait to hear from you and hear some of your works that you've selected to share with us today. But before we do that, we're going to make you official. So I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And that I will faithfully and impartially discharge.
And that I will faithfully and impartially discharge.
All of the duties incumbent upon me.
All of the duties incumbent upon me.
As the Poet Laureate of Virginia.
As the Poet Laureate of Virginia.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. You're all official, our newest Poet Laureate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And with that, I will turn the program over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Thomason. Thank you, first of all, to Governor Ralph Northam for the honor of this appointment, and to the First Lady of Virginia, Pamela Northam, for gracing this very important ceremony, and to the Secretary of the Commonwealth and their staff for making this ceremony possible. I want to thank my family who've been unfailingly supportive, and also my colleagues, students, and friends in Virginia and all over the US and the world who are attending the program right now. I want to thank outgoing Virginia Poet Laureate Henry Hart for his good work and service, and the Poetry Society of Virginia for the nomination leading to this appointment. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the efforts of our late friend and former Poetry Society Virginia President, Jeff Hewitt. as well as Michael Candelwall and Kendra McDonald. I prepared a few words too. So, with your permission, in early May, I learned I was on the short list and then more or less forgot about it because of everything else that's going on right now, the pandemic, our continued isolation, the actions for change that Black Lives Matter urges us to consider and carry out. So getting the notification on Thursday last week was a lovely surprise. And it's such an incredible honor, especially as I follow in the footsteps of so many amazing poets. Everyone who is a poet laureate is not only an advocate for poetry, but also addresses the idea of what it means to live and write as a person at their particular time and place in history. For me, though, it's the poets of color whose words somehow most closely address me. With Rita Dove, who was the first African American poet laureate of Virginia and of the United States, Sophia Starnes, who is of Spanish and Filipino ancestry, my friend and retired colleague Tim Siebels, who was also a poet laureate of Virginia, and now myself. So as an immigrant, I am proud to increase the number of poets of color who have been appointed to this distinguished position. These numbers more or less parallel those in the history of the Poet Laureateship of the United States. Of the 23, 5 poets of color have been appointed. And I feel that this is a significant indicator of important changes manifesting across the country that have to do with the reevaluation of history and the place that marginalized communities have been accorded in it. Excuse me. The Poet Laureateship is such a unique opportunity for service and engagement. While I have not had a chance to think through in fine detail what I hope to do, I hope to have many conversations with others to find meaningful ways to support and promote the voices of Virginian poets in particular, and the work of poets and poetry in general as an important part of living in our times. Past poet laureates, both at the state and national level, have done a lot of poetry good through programs that required them to travel widely. For instance, former U.S. Poet Laureate Tracy K. Smith took a poetry road trip across America. Former Virginia Poet Laureate Carolyn Kreider Ferranda went across the state to put poetry books in the hands of students and connect them with other resources. So the spread of coronavirus has restricted how we move around and organize activities, but it's also made us rise creatively to the challenge of how to continue to make poetry more publicly visible and accessible. With all your help during my term, I'd like to highlight the importance of poetry, creativity, and civic engagement through virtual programs, conversations, workshops, and similar outreach. In a recent meeting, the Poetry Society of Virginia broached the idea of a Young Poet Ambassadors program, and I am very excited to see how we can continue to develop that. But before I read 2 poems, just a couple more things that I wanted to share with you. There is this idea about how some of us who write poems and teach at the same time, that somehow our work is merely academic or theoretical and has no connection with real life, or that we write merely to count or publish books. Far from the truth. Some of you know that for nearly a decade, I've engaged in daily poetry practice. One thing I've learned is that poetry is my preferred way to think about and process experience. As someone introverted by nature and who as a child was clumsy, tongue-tied, and terrified of even talking on the phone, I am learning from poems how language tries to come as close as it possibly could to describing experience. This demands attention and the cultivation of sensitivity to listen and speak to each other better so we might gain a deeper understanding of our mutual condition as humans. Poet Tracy K. Smith said somewhere that a poem is a kind of wish for effortless comprehension. And I thought, that is so great. What she said reminded me of a long poem in Tagalog or Filipino, which was required reading for me, when I was in high school. This is Francisco Balagtas's metrical romance from 1838, Florante at Laura, or Florante and Laura, which is specifically, I'm thinking of the scene where the Albanian hero is lashed to a tree in the forest by his enemies and left to be devoured by wild animals. Aloud, he starts to lament his troubles, and a Persian prince fleeing his kingdom from where he has also been banished hears him and comes to his aid. They exchange life stories and become close friends and allies. I never thought about this before, but suddenly this seemed astounding, audacious, and profound. Here are two characters from two different cultures, and yet they're able to instantly understand each other through monorhyming 12-syllable quatrains in Tagalog poetry. So I thought that was pretty cool. Like them, we need poetry more than ever to help us express what is mostly inexpressible, our deepest feelings and truths, our hopes and fears, our doubts, heartbreak, rage, and joy. In this time of anxiety, divisiveness, and xenophobia, it is my hope that a poetry of active witness can reshape our engagement with each other so we can reimagine the world, address its wounds, and find a common hope. And I have brought two poems to read today. One is from my daily writing practice, and there are a few characters from Greek mythology who we will recognize. Basically, it is a poem in which I'm thinking about what it means to try to protect someone or keep someone safe. This poem is called Ode to the Hand Wrapped Around the Achilles Heel. Good husband material, her aunt's assessment, watching her fiancé help his parents navigate the narrow staircase from the gallery where they've gone to an art opening. He goes out in the rain to get the car, which he parked at the end, farthest from both entrance and exit, lessening the off chance a lorry or fire truck or other large vehicle might lose its brakes, swerve from the road, and ram into theirs. Over the years, she comes to learn how certain habits and the ways he likes to do things are driven by a combination of fear, planning, and precision, even if, or perhaps because, most things are outside the realm of total human jurisdiction. In the Iliad, their son in her arms, Andromache pleads with Hector not to go back to fight in a war that he opposes. But he is the kind of man for whom duty to country is synonymous with obligation to family. He will do what he can to prevent their being taken as spoils of war or slaves. Homer writes, 1,000 campfires gleamed upon the plain. When it is his time to go, he only wants to go with honor. Because victors in any kind of war don't always have compassion. Achilles gloats, not only calling on dogs and vultures to desecrate the corpse of his enemy, but also slitting his heel tendons, passing leather thongs through them before dragging Hector's body in the dust. This story is meant to illustrate weakness in any figure, victor or victim. Thus, every human fear of the end is a wish to protect, to render secure, if not invincible, whoever is in their care. Here is the ankle held fast in the mother's hand, the one blind spot her love kept dry from the waters of the underworld. Here is the rain that falls on all their heads with not a shield in sight, and always someone who volunteers to go first or last. And in closing, I'd like to read a poem, the opening poem to my book, Ode to the Heart, from Smaller Than a Pencil Eraser. And thank you all who have joined us today. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. This poem is called Wanderer. Oh, long awaited, are you nearly here? Is that your shadow I see from the window beginning to cross the field? Everywhere I look, there are emblems from years of laboring. Nettles that stung my hands, fronds of palm braided close to patch the holes in the roof. Here are shirts with sleeves of linen to throw on the shapes of the banished as they fly under cover of night, so they too might break free of their long enchantment. Here are grains spilled on muddy ground, where they still shine like pearls in moonlight, each one now accounted for. I read tonight that certain moths drink the tears of sleeping birds, turning sorrow into sustenance. Oh, long awaited, I have never left. I am still here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louisa. That was beautiful. Turning sorrow into sustenance. I like that line a lot. Thank you so much. I think your remarks were perfect and spot on, and exactly why we thought this was the right time for you to be the Poet Laureate of Virginia. And I think your work is beautiful, but it's also so relevant and important for Virginians to hear right now. So thank you. Thank you. We know you're going to do great work as our next Poet Laureate of Virginia for the next 2 years. We can't, as the First Lady said, it feels like it was just the other day that Henry was here being sworn in. So we know it's going to go by fast, but we're excited for all that you'll accomplish, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at the next ceremony, and hopefully hearing more great work about the great work that you're doing during your term as Poet Laureate. So thank you all. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. And I will say, I'm going to take one point of personal privilege, because you mentioned civic engagement and how important that is. And this is, of course, fulfilling this role is a way of doing that, of being civically engaged. And as Henry mentioned in my bio, one of the things that I do working with the governor is making appointments to all of our boards and commissions. Poet Laureate is one. 1,000 appointments we'll make just this year. And so if anybody who's joined us today is interested in serving, we've got, you might not be the next Poet Laureate of Virginia, but you've got lots of other opportunities from education boards and natural resources and healthcare boards and public safety, and lots of ways to get involved and make sure that your community and your voice is represented and being heard across all levels of state government. So if anybody's interested, check out our website, commonwealth.virginia.gov. You can see all of the vacancies that we've got and apply to serve on those boards. So I didn't want to let this great big audience that we have get away without putting in a plug for that. And so thank you so much again for all that you'll do to promote civic engagement and dialogue and listening and learning. So thank you all again. Have a great day. And
Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Buddy.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.